Good afternoon, dear participants. Today we are speaking on a rather vital, rather burning issue of international political agenda, situation in Ukraine. We call it special military operation. It was declared by President Vladimir Putin on the 24th of February. And it pursues three major goals. Firstly, defense of the population of the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics from genocide at the hands of Ukrainian army and neo-Nazi military formations, which are now majorly included into National Guard of Ukraine as battalions. And that genocide has been going on for previous 8 years, since the outburst of that crisis early 2014. The second goal of the operation is demilitarization of Ukraine. We'll elaborate a little bit later on this issue. And thirdly, the third goal of the special military operation is denazification. That means uprooting the neo-Nazi movement in this country, a very dangerous phenomenon that we are eyewitnessing already for some years. Absolute priority of the Russian army during the operation is exclusion of any unnecessary casualties among civilian population. In every combat area, in particular, if it is about towns or townships, bigger settlements, special humanitarian corridors are arranged so that to allow peaceful civilian population to leave the area of hostilities. But unfortunately, it has become an everyday practice on behalf of the Ukrainian authorities, though it is not reported at all in the West. They do not give their consent for most of those green corridors offered by the Russian party, Russian side, and insist only on corridors leading to the West. We do not have many objections about that, but the problem is that even those corridors are, in most cases, are under fire control of the nationalist battalions. And we have a whole big pile of facts and evidence showing that those civilians trying to leave dangerous areas, they just find themselves under fire. As a result, effectiveness is much lower. High-precision weapons selectively and accurately destroy Ukrainian military infrastructure. We'll give some details later if you are interested. After a month and a few days of operation, we can firmly and confidently state that all those three goals were never imaginary, they were not our fantasy, as it could be conceived from the Western media coverage. But in any way, we are sure that judging by all those aspects, special military operation of Russian army in no way should be qualified as unprovoked, unjustified, and illegitimate. It proceeds on the basis of the Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, providing for the legitimate right of any state for self-defense. Let us come back to the first goal of the operation so that you see how justified was the first goal of intervening to save innocent civilian lives in Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. In fact, the military operation thwarted a large-scale offensive by shock groups of Ukrainian troops on those republics. In particular by certain military formations like the neo-Nazis, who in fact are not under control of authorities in Kiev. This made it possible to save tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands innocent lives, because the previous record shows us that endless shelling of the civilian quarters, neighborhoods, civilian infrastructure like water supply, sewage, electric power supply, anything, including bridges and roads, has become a daily practice, a daily routine of the operations of Ukrainian army against those two republics. Not to forget about subversive terrorist, to put it plainly, activities of the special groups sent by security service of Ukraine into those republics to kill, to assassinate people. A number of examples is very big, including former head of the Donetsk Republic, Alexander Zakharchenko, who was assassinated in a cafe by a bomb installed by security service of Ukraine group, terrorist group, in the capital city of Donetsk 3 years ago, roughly, a little bit more. Complementary to all that information and prerequisites I have already mentioned, during the hostilities themselves, Russian forces captured originals of secret cipher telegrams, telegrams that were sent to the units of neo-Nazi battalions incorporated in National Guard. I've already mentioned it, instructing the command of those units to round up all preparations, coordination work, so that starting from first days of March, they would be ready to take part in an overall assault against Lugansk and Donetsk republics. Secondly, coming to the second goal, during the hostilities, during the military operation, our forces got opportunities to receive first-hand information, including documents signed and sealed by American officials on dangerous biological research having been carried out by about 30 biolaboratories located on Ukrainian territory. All those laboratories were operational under the auspices of Pentagon, that means Ministry of Defense of the United States, Department for Minimizing Threats. And the major goals of those research works carried out by those laboratories were to study poisonous qualities of dangerous natural diseases like plague, anthrax, Congo-Crimean hemorrhagic fever, and many others. I am not a great expert in biology, but believe me, you can see all those stamps, Ukrainian, Americans, and testimony that was given by the Undersecretary of State, Victoria Nuland, recently in the American Congress, in fact, should be taken as an official recognition of direct links and involvement of American authorities into the activities of those laboratories. The overall number of such laboratories exceeds 300. They are dispersed all over the world, but not on the territory of the United States. American military and American government prefers that all those dangerous research experiments be taken outside of American territory. To my mind, in fact, this is a direct attempt on creating of biological, prohibited by international convention, biological weapons, because in addition to studying those qualities of those bacteria, another two directions of research were studying the bioassays of the population of Ukraine, which is multi-ethnic by origin, population of Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian, and other Slavic origins, so that to understand how and in what way it is possible to make them affected by those poisonous qualities of improved poisonous qualities of classic dangerous diseases. The specificity of this issue is that for some time before, attention of the international public was attracted to this issue. Such laboratories are located, for example, in Georgia, in Kazakhstan, elsewhere around the Russian Federation. But never American authorities allowed in-depth if you like, visit, in-depth getting acquainted with the contents of those research work carried out in such laboratories. And in this regard, you know that now with new facts and new evidence, this information has caused rather big concern on behalf of a number of powers, including People's China. On the other hand, while carrying out the military operation in Ukraine, we had to took under control the vicinity of former Chernobyl nuclear power plant, where not used up to the end nuclear fuel is stored for years now. And in principle, it is a reservoir which could be used to create so-called dirty bomb on the basis of depleted uranium, a bomb of the kind used by American, in the first place, American aviation during the campaign of enforcement of democracy on Yugoslavia in 1999. Until now in Serbia, we have hundreds of people suffering from radiation, from the effects of that radiation brought by those depleted uranium bombs. Not to forget about rather transparent, rather, I would say, outspoken declaration of President Zelensky in his speech in the last session of the Munich Conference for International Security, when he expressed desire of Ukraine, allegedly forced by the circumstances, to restore Ukrainian nuclear status in spite of the fact that Ukraine has signed in due time non-proliferation treaty. All those, both those topics, I would say, make it quite vital and justified for special military operation of Russian army to pursue the goal of demilitarization of Ukraine. Because we are facing a real danger of obtaining by this country of weapons of mass destruction, quite logically, for us to perceive this military buildup as an existential threat to security of Russian Federation in modern geopolitical, as well as geopolitical realities, as well as real challenge for strategic stability. Third goal of the operation is formulated as denazification. Here in Romania, I've heard many questions. How do you justify that claim that there is a revival of Nazism in Ukraine? Nobody knows it, or so, and so on and so forth. Please bring us more facts and evidence. Gradually, those facts and evidence have started to penetrate into the public space, information space, even in the West. Although, of course, we shouldn't forget that the major proof, if you like, of justified character of this goal is the practice, the behavior of those Nazi battalions now in the current hostilities and in the previous 8 years when they were besieging Lugansk and Donetsk republics. They were, in fact, cutting supplies for them, and not only for them. For example, in the south of the country, under the auspices of Ukrainian authorities, a big irrigation channel, which had been constructed in the Soviet time for providing potable water to the Crimean Peninsula, was in fact plumbed, and a big dam was installed there so that potable water becomes unavailable for the peaceful population, civilian population of Crimean Peninsula. And if you look deeper into the documents related to the crimes of genocide, you'll find that this is one of the crimes of this category. In the current situation, since February 24, neo-Nazi battalions in Ukraine have shown their complete devotion, not only to the symbols, not only to the principles of Nazism, but they have shown all kind of atrocities, barbarism, brutality, including completely inhumane treatment of prisoners of war, overall appeals to complete extermination of Russians as a nation, and so on and so forth. I will not overload you with details, but they are numerous. To our mind, and the Russian Federation, Russian people, all the nations living in the Russian Federation, they are very sensitive about this issue, because in the family of former Soviet nations, we have lost over 27 million lives of daughters and sons of our motherland during the Great Patriotic War, Second World War, as it is better known in the West. And all of them, they fell at the hands of Nazi, fascist criminals, and their collaborators. In this optic, Russian Federation is not ready to stay idle in face of the real risk of revival of neo-Nazism in Europe at such a large scale. And in this connection, I would like to underscore, this is, for example, illustrating military preparation in the completely racist, in completely Nazi spirit of the younger Azov. This is the name of the most notorious military formation of neo-Nazis, which is now blocking still blocking some quarters in Mariupol, killing civilians in numbers, and doing all kinds of other atrocities on the spot. And in this occasion, I would like to underscore that Nazism very often is interpreted as a kind of equivalent with anti-Semitism and linked only to Holocaust. In fact, it is not true. This is not only ideology, but it is criminal practice, anti-human racist ideology of one race supremacy, whatever is the name of that race, proclaimed supreme, superior to the rest of the mankind, which is treated as subhumans. So many illustrations of such behavior, ideology, and practice, crimes, to put it plainly, we can see in Ukraine during the recent years, and in particular now in the framework of this special military operation of Russian army. General outcome of the first phase of special military operation was summarized by Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, Mr. Sergei Shoigu, who stated yesterday in the morning in a press conference, or was it a press conference? I'm not quite sure. It was a statement broadcast on Russian TV for sure. He stated that the first phase of military operation is completed successfully. And the first major outcome that should be remembered in this regard is that currently Ukrainian air forces and air defense system have been almost completely destroyed. Naval forces of Ukraine has ceased to exist. 15 major military airfields were defeated so that combat aircraft can't carry out their sorties from those locations. 39 storages and bases, arsenals were destroyed. They contained about 70% of all stocks of military equipment, material and fuel, and more than 1,054,000 tons of ammunition. All 24 formations of the land forces of Ukraine that existed before the start of the operation suffered significant losses. Ukraine has no organized reserve available. In addition to that, we shouldn't forget that at the appeal responding to the call of Ukrainian authorities, about 6,600 foreign mercenaries, this number, of course, is approximative. It could be more. Number could be greater. About at least 6,600 foreign mercenaries and terrorists from 62 states of the world have arrived to Ukraine for, as far as I can imagine, or maybe they imagined that it would be a kind of safari. But in fact, from the beginning, the High Command of the Russian forces has declared that they are not eligible to be considered as subject to the rules of war and will be ruthlessly destroyed. You remember that with high precision missile weapons, a big training center of mercenaries was destroyed in the vicinity of Lvov in the western Ukraine at the beginning of this month. Only during the recent fortnight, about 600 foreign mercenaries were liquidated, majorly with the use of that high precision missile weapons. And about 500 of them have just ran away from Ukraine, being disillusioned with the realities they had to face there. In order to prevent the restoration of weapons and military equipment of Ukrainian army, Russian forces are consistently disabling repair enterprises, arsenals, storage bases, logistics, warehouses with high precision weapons. At the moment, it is about 30 of such enterprises of military industrial complex of Ukraine have been hit by cruise missiles X-101, Kaliber, Iskander, and Kinzhal aviation complex. who managed to destroy a big store of ammunition, which was covered in a special, highly fortified stores that were constructed in the Soviet time and were built so that they can survive tactical nuclear weapon attack. We are closely monitoring the statements of the military and political leadership of the NATO states about the intention to supply aircraft or air defense systems to Ukraine. In case of implementation of those plans, or I don't know, hopes, Russian military command will not leave it without attention. We also hear assurances from NATO leaders about non-interference into conflict. But nevertheless, they are playing with such ideas as no-fly zone or arms supplies to the Ukrainian authorities. And Russian command has already declared openly that our armed forces will immediately respond accordingly to any attempts of NATO to declare a no-fly zone over Ukraine, and will consider convoys of new arms supplies to Ukraine as legitimate targets for our long and medium range weapons of high precision. I don't believe that you are interested in all the details, but I can bring you a number of figures, for a couple of figures. For example, statistics show that out of 2,400 roughly tanks and armored fighting vehicles, by now it is 1,740 units already destroyed. Out of 1,500 field artillery guns and mortars, over a half are destroyed. Out of 152 aircraft, combat aircraft, 123 are destroyed, and so on, including such mysterious weapon as Bayraktar UAVs, unmanned air vehicles, that are, according to our data, almost all of them have been already destroyed by our forces in Ukraine. The most dangerous arm or weapon, if you like, in this regard, became a so-called .U short-range missile that was long ago used in the Soviet army. This is a missile of not a high precision, but able to carry rather big warhead. And on several occasions we have seen, for example, recently in Donetsk during current military operation, we saw that it was used against purely civilian quarters with the warheads containing cassette bombs, which are designed to kill and wound personnel, military personnel, because it has many splinters that are spread over the large territory around that missile on the ground. Our forces report that 7 .U launches have been already destroyed, and 85% of missiles in arsenals and the air have been already destroyed as well. All those factors significantly limited Ukraine's capabilities for the combat use of all that equipment, military equipment and weapons. And in spite of the fact that Kiev regime was, even after the beginning of special military operation, was supplied with some over 100 field artillery guns, about 4,000 anti-tank weapons, including all those notorious Javelin, Milan, Concourse, and Law, M72, Panzerfaust, and so on, as well as manpads. That means portable anti-air defense systems, as well, counted in hundreds, about 1,000 already. We consider it a vast mistake of the Western countries to supply weapons to Kyiv. This delays the conflict, increases the number of casualties, victims among the civilians, and it will not be able to influence the outcome of the operation. The Russian Federation was forced to start special military operation in Ukraine, not to find itself in a situation of 22nd of June, 1941. Hopefully, this comparison is quite meaningful for you. Another point I would like to touch upon today is humanitarian situation in Ukraine and factories of war propaganda fakes managed by the West. The most eloquent and fierce criticism against the military operation of Russian Federation, we're speaking about war propaganda campaign. In fact, the whole industry of producing of lies and fakes about situation in Ukraine, the goals and nature of special military operation of Russian Federation, as well, and in the first place about the behavior of the Russian forces in Ukraine, have been launched and is working at its maximum capacity. During the operation itself, with high precision weapons, some locations of Ukrainian propaganda military units have been already destroyed. The most spectacular episode I would like to remember was Kyiv's Ukrainian capital, Kyiv's TV tower, great high construction, carrying different equipment, and high precision Russian weapon just destroyed a kind of a block of that equipment that was suspended on the TV tower of Ukrainian capital. Tower stands as it was. It stands intact. But after that equipment and a number of military propaganda and psychological war centers were destroyed, I can tell you that Russian public now is not suffering from false calls, allegedly from security services of the banks where they keep their money, telling them that they have some problems and they should immediately inform the caller of some personal information about one's banking cards and so on and so forth. Many people, in particular elderly ones, they were not so smart with all those modern techniques and procedures, and they lost their money. On the other hand, hundreds of telephone calls was warning authorities and parents, for example, of this kindergarten or that school, be in mind, explosives allegedly being installed somewhere in those schools, shopping malls, hospitals, and so on and so forth. After destruction of those information war centers in Ukraine, most of their calls are now non-existent. Believe me, this is a good indicator of efficiency of special military operation. Though I can tell you that Western PR and war propaganda facilities immediately joined the battle, and exactly on February 24th, there was a special project launched, and I'm not going to retell you all the information. I can only recommend to you to get acquainted with investigative article of Dan Cohen, Washington, D.C. correspondent for Behind the Headlines, as far as I can judge, media project. It reveals the existence of a whole network of foreign strategists, Washington, D.C. lobbyists, and intelligence-linked media outlets behind Ukrainians' public relations blitzkrieg. They have immediately on the first day of the operation, they started to work. There could be no better proof that all that campaign had been prepared beforehand. Their major goal at the first instance was to present Ukrainian army as a little plucky man standing up to the Russian Goliath. To bolster the perception of Ukrainian military mettle, that means courage and bravery, Kyiv has churned out a steady stream of sophisticated propaganda aimed at stirring public and official support from Western countries. They were immediately supported by the Western public relations PR outlets, in particular in Great Britain and the United States. The campaign included all kinds of already trusted and tested methods of information war, which is now often called in the European Union strategic communication. Key propaganda effort is an international legion of public relations firms working directly with the Ukraine Ministry of Foreign Affairs to wage information warfare. Many of those outlets are using xenophobic and racist language, and some are explicitly praising prominent Ukrainian neo-Nazis, like, for example, C-14 leader Yevhen Karas, right sector fascist paramilitary, and the neo-Nazi Azov battalion, already mentioned in our review. They use all methods known as well, but nevertheless worthy to be remembered, like correct wording. There couldn't be expressions like referendum, people's will, used in their reports and the informations. They should be used only the words and definitions like aggression, illegitimate annexation, occupation, and so on and so forth. Ukrainian public relations firms have used targeted advertisements to intoxicate Russian internet. On the other hand, Facebook blocked Russian state-owned media outlets from running ads and monetizing content. Several fake accounts for media outlets like Russia 24 have sprung up around the world, bearing authentic account under a series of imposters. Facebook has also marked statements from Russian officials, including Ministry of Defense, as false. Meanwhile, Russian hackers located a public Google document detailing the propaganda operation, which has been distributed in Telegram channels of creative firms. This article, this research contains as well a good list of Russian language and foreign language websites who are working for the benefit of that military campaign and aim distorting and perverting information coming from Ukraine to create completely fake impression in the Western public about what is going on during the special military operation of Russian army in this neighboring country. Most ironic, though, is my conclusion that nobody is going to apologize for all those fakes and lies of information war. More than many fakes born during the Ukrainian crisis will remain as new bricks in the skyscraper of lies, which symbolizes the post-truth reality, which is incrementally absorbs and dominates the Western society and political science. In the same way, like those fake facts have been already included in that vocabulary of big empire of lies, like Russian aggression against Georgia in 2008, illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014, and so on and so forth. Humanitarian situation in Ukraine, indeed, after the start of operation, is characterized by a number of dangerous challenges. Most of them we owe to the operations of Ukrainian army and neo-Nazi military units that use civilian population as human shields, prevent delivery of humanitarian aid to peaceful neighborhoods, systematically shelling and destroying the objects of civilian infrastructure, which have been already mentioned. On the other side, Russian forces by today have already delivered to Ukrainian townships, their number is about 210, over 6,080 tons of humanitarian aid, foodstuffs, potable water, medicines. Russian military medics provide urgent support and treatment not only to their comrades in arms, but to civilian population as well. Last but never least, army engineers managed to relaunch potable water supplies from irrigation channel Dnieper, Crimea, not only to Crimean Peninsula, but to a large formerly cultivated lands of Kherson Oblast, so that they could restart their regular production of agricultural produce there. That channel I already mentioned was closed up back in 2014. To make the picture more comprehensive, we shouldn't forget about 500,000 of Ukrainian refugees that have been already received by more than 24 of Russian regions. Of course, it is not about Sakhalin camps like it was claimed in one of the questions we received before the briefing. All of them, they're accommodated. Children of school age immediately are introduced into schools, and younger children into kindergartens. All of them receive all kinds of humanitarian aid. Some of them had to flee away without any personal effects, without proper clothes and so on and so forth. Russian public, I should say, like public in Romania, are very sympathetic and very supportive of those refugees and supply them along with the specialized NGOs, supplied them with all necessities for the moment. Every person coming to Russia from Ukraine as a refugee get a special allowance from our government, which amounts to 10,000 rubles. I can't recollect all the names of Russian regions where they are temporarily accommodated. Some of them say that they are willing to stay in Russia after the war is over. Some of them are still waiting for peace to be restored in their motherland. Another topic, maybe the last but one, which is of interest to you, I'm trying to build my report on questions that we have received, is the topic, let us give diplomacy a chance. Russian diplomacy has made all possible efforts to give a chance for peace and democratic solution of all problems of Ukraine. The first of rememberable contribution in this regard was intervention of President Putin when he, at the request of, at that time, President of the United States of Amnesia, Mr. Barack Obama, solicited non-use of violence, of force, of arms against the activists of Maidan during the rather mass public disorder in Kiev at the end of 2013, beginning of 2014. And he managed to convince, at that time, Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych not to use force. Force was used against the forces of public order. Anti-riot police, Berkut, were shot by snipers. Now it is well known that they came from Georgia. They were attacked with Molotov cocktails and so on and so forth. We are not going to dig too deep into it, but we shouldn't forget in this context that later, when this conflict outbursted in eastern Ukraine and Donbass, it was Russian diplomacy that insisted on those Minsk Accords being negotiated at the top level and being approved by authoritative international instances like Security Council of the United Nations. We didn't spare any effort to move on direct contacts between Kiev, Lugansk, and Donetsk in tripartite contact group, which was operational in Minsk for years and years, without any tangible result. Why? Because Ukrainian diplomacy, maybe it was not diplomacy at all, but the overall outcome of their efforts were mountains of demagogy, endless number of maneuvers, allegations, accusations, and in fact, consistent and well-intended sabotage of those political, peaceful, diplomatic methods and solutions that were provided in those Minsk Accords. Nowadays, recently, already in the related to the situation in Ukraine after the start of military operation, there were two events, major events, in New York at the headquarters of the United Nations. The first one was Security Council session to approve humanitarian resolution on Ukraine situation. In line with the already well-established tradition in the United Nations, Russian delegation prepared a purely humanitarian draft of resolution, which will give UN agencies and NGOs, international NGOs, adequate mandate to go to Ukraine to provide necessary humanitarian aid. Only Russia and People's Republic of China voted in favor of that resolution out of 15 members of the Security Council. The rest of the delegations, majorly the Western countries, they cynically, I would say cynically, abstained, in fact, preventing adoption of the document. As a result, seeing that in the Security Council, there is no way for politicization of this issue, Western diplomacy pushed the point on the agenda of the United Nations General Assembly. And as well, there appeared two draft resolutions. One of them, sponsored by South Africa, was really concentrating, focusing the attention on the issues of humanitarian character. But this draft was not allowed even to reach the phase of voting. As an opposite alternative proposal, there was another draft with numerous accusations of Russia, all kinds of blames, unjustified allegations introduced. And when it was supported by 140 states members of the United Nations, it was received triumphantly by the Western diplomats. Though we know very well, and we do not make any secret out of it, colleagues of our delegation in the United Nations confidentially informed them that it was unprecedented pressure, unprecedented blackmail that was used by American and some other Western countries' representatives to make them vote in favor. And in spite of all that unprecedented pressure, which is already can't be qualified as a sincere, in good faith diplomacy, the number of countries that didn't support, abstained, were not present at the voting or voted against was rather substantial, about 40. But the most interesting detail, which is always omitted in this context, is that those countries like Algeria, People's China, India, Pakistan, Iran, South Africa, of course, Russia, and others, they represent the majority of our humankind. That is why these falsified attitudes towards true role of diplomacy in helping to find solutions for really heavy, really complicated humanitarian situations in Ukraine should be continued in good faith, honestly, and not to pursue the anti-Russian, if you like, destructive objectives in this campaign. Otherwise, it is not diplomacy. Just yesterday, I'm happy to inform you, maybe you have heard something about it, in Istanbul, there took place another session. Nobody knows how many sessions preceded. Another session of Russian-Ukrainian delegations talks about future settlement of situation in Ukraine. For the first time, Russian delegation with satisfaction stated that a written position of Ukrainian side was received. That doesn't mean that they expressed satisfaction with the contents of that position. Head of our delegation, Mr. Medinsky, former Minister of Culture, informed the newsman that his immediate duty is to report the position of Ukrainian delegation to the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, President of Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. And this is this will be next step. On the other hand, it was announced on behalf of the Russian military command that to facilitate further work on this in this direction, Russian military forces are going to slow down their activities in two major areas around the capital city of Kyiv, so that Ukrainian government feel comfortable enough to continue work on their proposals on the future principles and forms of the settlement of the situation. And around Chernigov, which is one of the major cities on the border of Russian Federation. By the way, from Chernigov, neighboring Kharkov, some other cities, millions of telephone calls were received in Russia on the channels of the urgent communication of the Ministry of Defense in particular, asking for help to allow Ukrainian citizens escape towards territory of Russian Federation from that areas. But most of those attempts were failed. At the beginning of the operation, you remember, there was a long creeping stories of foreign students not allowed to leave Ukraine, but in the direction of the Western Europe. Though in many cases, like case of Kyiv, case of Kharkov, major university cities, it would have been much easier to leave towards Russian Federation. No, it was a political decision imposed by the neo-Nazis and their sponsors in Kyiv and in the West. By the way, you shouldn't forget that many refugees crossing western borders of Ukraine towards Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania as well, it has been already become known that they are people not the most suffering and not the most, so to say, restricted in their material, in their means, material and financial means available to them. Some accounts show that billions of euro have been already smuggled into the Western Europe with those refugees crossing Western borders. Nevertheless, coming back to the situation with the ongoing negotiations with Ukraine, I can say that what should be remembered, that military operation is pursuing well-defined by President Vladimir Putin goals, and it is not stopped, it is not suspended. And the next phase, as it was explained by our Minister of Defense, the next phase will focus our attention on final destruction, liquidation of a major Ukrainian troops and nationalist battalions concentration to the west of Donetsk, the capital city of Donetsk People's Republic, which is the area from which that massive and systemic continuous shelling, bombing, and missile attacks were addressed and directed against the People's Republic. By now, we can report that the last, I would say, pockets of resistance of nationalist battalions in Mariupol, a major city port on Azov Sea, are being cleaned up from those criminals. So many atrocities come now to the surface. All of them, they will be documented and presented to the international public opinion and international judicial quarters. By the way, in the same manner, in 2014 and 2015, when the first military phase of civil conflict in Ukraine took place, you remember, and Minsk Accords crowned that period of time politically, a number of facts and hard evidence cases were collected in the territories temporarily occupied by Ukrainian neo-Nazis and later liberated by the people's militias of Donetsk and Lugansk republics. And a good number, hundreds, as far as I'm informed, hundreds of residents of those republics filed requests and complaints, sending them to European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. Not a single complaint sent and filed by the residents of Donetsk and Lugansk have been considered properly through all those years which have elapsed since then, for 5, 6, 7 years, and not a single verdict have been declared by this really glorious institution of defense of human rights. This is, unfortunately, if you like, the sad reality of international relations. And the last one topic that I would like to mention, to touch upon, is sanctions and economic consequences of them. You know very well that special military operation was used by collective West, as we call it, meaning NATO plus G7, roughly, that's all. And it was used as a pretext for escalating economic pressure, sectorial blockade of Russian industry, financial isolation from major Western markets, and so on. Enumeration will take too much time. I don't believe they are interested in it. The Americans nicknamed the latest bunch of the sanctions against Russia, sanctions from hell. If it is about deep crisis, economic crisis in the West, to mention the signs of that crisis, record inflation, record energy tariffs, problems with chains of supplies, and so on, or maybe a deep political and moral crisis collective West is living through, and it has such aspects and dimensions as cancel culture, revision of its own political and historical heritage, moral crisis, revision of culture was already mentioned, destruction of moral values inherited from the ancestors, and so on and so on. Then I would agree that really West is already somewhere in hell, sending us hello from there. But of course, I'm joking. Unfortunately, unfortunately for the plans of the West, all the previous history of Russia has shown for about a millennium that maybe it was a couple of decades when Russia lived without any foreign sanctions. They were very different. For the moment, we're a record holder for foreign sanctions. They have counted them, and the number now exceeds 5,500 sanctions against Russia have been declared. No one in the world, neither Iran, neither North Korea, neither Venezuela, neither Cuba, which suffers under sanctions for over half a century, could match our result. So what can we do? We live on, and after 2014 EU sanctions, which were declared under the false pretext of alleged responsibility of Russia for shooting down Malaysian airliner, which is a crazy assumption, a crazy allegation, given all the details and facts having been already made public. Russian agro-industrial complex has, if you like, flourished, and in a very short period of time, Russia became, if not, but the first #1 exporter of cereals to the international markets. And we shouldn't forget about a situation that now is resulting from massive Western support to the neo-Nazi movement and criminal regime in Kiev. Brussels is already expressing its concern about the risk of food shortages in some areas of the world resulting from conflict in Ukraine. Latest series of illegal from the point of view of international law, anti-Russian sanctions reminds me an anecdote about a crazy printer that has got out of master's control. For some years now, Russian government has embarked on the course of import substitution. As a single one result of effect of that course, I can bring to your attention resumption of production of big passenger planes, civilian planes. The expertise, the know-how of doing it was lost in Russia after advice of best international consultants flooding our ministries. I have already mentioned it in the 90s, after Soviet Union was voluntarily dismantled by the republics that were members of this big country. And there are other illustrations of it that could be a subject of another briefing if you are so much interested. A week ago, President Putin ordered Gazprom to revise its supply contracts with the counterparts from unfriendly states. Unfriendly states, by now, It is a list of the countries which includes all the countries that have declared their support of anti-Russian sanctions in the recent period of time. At first, it was only the United States and Czechia. Now it is United States, all members of European Union, Canada, or better to say, all members of NATO practically, plus Japan, Republic of Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. If I'm not mistaken, it is more or less the full list of those unfriendly countries. And he ordered Gazprom that future supplies, future deals for selling Russian natural gas to those unfriendly countries, their companies, should be quoted in rubles and should be paid in rubles. Now we have heard a number of critical comments and so on and so forth, but it is not a crazy caprice of a dictator like Mr. Putin is qualified in the West, completely unjustifiably, but a decision dictated by sanctions, which have cut Russia from electronic banking transfer system SWIFT, and froze or suspended, if you like, a good part of our hard currency reserves in Western banks. The above sanctions in reality suggest that Russia from now on won't be able to get its honestly earned money for our national resources in a regular way, in foreign currency, because all transactions are banned. Those sanctions, in fact, undermine trust into dollar and other currencies like euro, pound sterling, and others. But if we look attentively and try to evaluate the meaning of that stand reflected in the complex of sanctions, it is a technical default that has been announced by the West for its financial and monetary obligations. Because that money, it is our money. It is not something that is called greenback, that means dollar. It is money earned for real resources. It is money earned for goods and merchandise sold in the international market. And the West now has declared that it is not able to pay for those obligations. It is a technical default in my mind. Though I am not a great expert in finance, I would let room and tribune for experts, for financial and economic analysts, consultants that would explain it better. In spite of all those difficulties emerging, of course, it is not an overnight arrangement, but President Putin, Press Secretary Mr. Dmitry Peskov, qualified or maybe formulated, if you like, our position in a more summarized way: no room for charity, no money, no gas. This is our stand of principle, and as far as I'm informed, we'll maintain this line in the nearest future. Isn't the catastrophe, if you like, inevitable? I believe that in no way it is the case. Market economy, in particular, when it is free from unfair competition, like, for example, banning extremely feasible economically Nord Stream 2 at the political orders of Washington. One illustration, there are many of them. Market economy is rather flexible toolbox. The major unfair beneficiary of the whole turmoil that we're now eyewitnessing in world economy will be the United States of America, forcing on the EU its own non-competitive price, its own liquefied natural gas, But the truly sovereign states with sovereign foreign policy will find both reliable consumers for their export goods and reliable sources of supply for the raw materials, industrial goods, and intellectual produce necessary for their sustainable and independent development. Judging by many authoritative economy wizards' opinion, nevertheless, global catastrophe is approaching. In the first place, for the dollar empire of lie. I'm quoting President Putin in the second part of this definition. He called collective West the empire of lie. I'm speaking not about ideology or politics, but about a false value of all those petrodollars and so on and so forth. Indeed, for at least 4 decades, since that great oil supply crisis of 70s, and since exactly beginning of the 1980s, all of us, all countries of the world, but the United States, are willingly or unwillingly has been participating in this common global charity with the major beneficiary in the United States of America and represented by financial oligarchy in some Western countries. Though it is not the topic of diplomatic agenda, I believe it could be an interesting, very curious discussion that could deal with all those dimensions of the situation. And I leave the room for the financial and economic experts to say their word. I'm sure that the explanation will be more convincing to you. Thank you for your kind attention. My briefing is over, and I believe that some questions could be allowed to continue our today's program.
Вот, добрый день. Здравствуйте.
Добрый.
Вот у меня 2 вопроса небольших. Если все-таки не получится так, чтобы западные компании оплатили в рублях газовые поставки из России, может ли Россия перекрыть кран и просто не поставлять газ? Это первый вопрос. Второй вопрос. Во время последнего раунда переговоров с Украиной Россия дала понять, что она не против вступления Украины в Европейский Союз. В связи с этим возникает вопрос, а не может ли так получиться, что между Европейским Союзом и Евразийским экономическим союзом будет заключено соглашение о том, что и другие страны, бывшие республики Советского Союза, участники Евразийского экономического союза, захотят тоже вступить после вот такого, значит, открытия со стороны России, тоже захотят вступить в Европейский Союз. Вот может ли так получиться? Спасибо.
Хорошо. Хорошие, интересные вопросы. Значит, ну, те люди, которые хорошо знакомы с советской и ранней российской поп-культурой, помнят песню Пугачевой «Если долго mучиться, что-нибудь получится».
Oamenii care cunosc cultura țărilor post-sovietice, cunosc piesa Alei Pugaceva, dacă te chinui mult, vei obține un rezultat.
Значит, в этом смысле я упоминал, что решение вопроса об оплате потребует определенного времени.
În acest sens am menționat că soluționarea problemei achitării va necesita un timp.
Вместе с тем, это решение носит принципиальный характер, и оно основано на нашем отношении к вот тем 5500 западных санкций против России, и вряд ли может быть пересмотрено, поскольку Запад не собирается пересматривать эти санкции, а только все grazit новыми sancțiile.
Și în același timp, soluția este una principală și este legată de atitudinea noastră față de cele 5500 de sancțiuni care au fost impuse împotriva Rusiei. Vedem că Occidentul nu are în gând să revizuiască poziția sa și noi nu revizuim poziția noastră.
Будет ли в таком случае перекрыт газ, если мы не будем получать оплату? Будет.
Va fi suspendată furnizarea de gaze dacă gazul nu va fi achitat. Да, nu va fi furnizat gaz.
Да, в такой афористичной форме я уже формулировал этот ответ. Нет денег, нет газа.
Am formulat deja acest răspuns în formă aforistică. Nu sunt banii, nu este gaz.
У нас нет никаких оснований для продолжения вот этой вот бездумной благотворительности в отношении Запада, который объявил нас врагом и пытается затормозить наше развитие. И не будем сейчас продолжать эту тему и преследовать другие еще более мрачные и неприемлемые для нас цели.
Nu avem motive pentru caritate față de Occidentul care ne-a declarat dușman și care a frânat dezvoltarea noastră și a făcut multe alte lucruri.
Что касается второго вопроса, я не слышал никаких официальных заявлений о том, что Россия не возражает против вступления Украины в Евросоюз.
În ceea ce privește cea de-a
Особенно на
doua
последнем этапе.
întrebare, eu nu am auzit nicio declarație de acest fel din partea Rusiei, că Rusia nu ar fi împotriva aderării Ucrainei la UE.
Когда в свое время у России развивались отношения стратегического партнерства с Евросоюзом, а эти времена отстоят от нас как раз примерно вот на 8 лет украинского кризиса.
Când aveam relații de parteneriat strategic cu UE și acest timp se află la distanță de 8 ani din vremurile noastre.
Россия последовательно проводила линию на то, чтобы не делать процесса интеграции на востоке Европы и на западе Европы некими антагонистическими явлениями, которые должны бороться друг с другом и уничтожить одно другое во что бы то ни стало.
Linia Rusiei era următoare. Rusia nu cataloga procesele de integrare în vest și în est ca fiind antagonistice.
Закончил, да? К сожалению, с тех пор многое изменилось. Если вы помните, из-за чего, собственно, обострилась ситуация в свое время в Киеве, на Украине, предоставив Соединенным Штатам возможность перевести свое вмешательство во внутриукраинские дела в фазу незаконного, насильственного государственного переворота. Это были разногласия относительно соглашения об ассоциации Украины с Евросоюзом.
Dar mult s-a schimbat și trebuie să ne amintim ce s-a întâmplat, de ce situația s-a escaladat și de ce SUA au început intervenția în treburile interne ale Ucrainei, făcând o lovitură de stat legitimă. Aceasta a fost legat de întrebările legate de асоциация Украины к УЭ.
Тогда на форуме Восточного партнерства Евросоюза, вам понятно, что это такое, канцлер Меркель заявила господину Януковичу, президенту Украины, незадолго до этого, что если вы не подпишете это соглашение, его подпишет другой президент Украины. Почти дословно.
La forumul Parteneriatul Estic, cancelarul Germaniei, Angela Merkel, i-a spus președintelui Ucrainei, Victor Yanukovych, dacă nu semnați acordul de asociere acest acord va fi semnat de un alt președinte. Asta este aproape cuvânt pe cuvânt.
Хотя Янукович просил всего лишь об отсрочке для более глубокого изучения содержания этого соглашения, Януковича, в том числе благодаря активным усилиям Германии, отправили в эмиграцию, в изгнание.
Deși Ianucovici a solicitat doar o amânare a semnării pentru a studia în mod mai detaliat acest acord, în urma urmelor, Ianucovici a fost trimis în emigrare, inclusiv cu participarea Germaniei.
Да, а как он туда отправился? Когда при свидетельском участии, под гарантией Германии, Франции и Польши было подписано соглашение с оппозицией украинской, которое на следующий день этой оппозицией было растоптано, и активисты Майдана перешли к прямым военным действиям против безоружных, как мы знаем, блюстителей и охраны порядка тогдашней в Киеве.
Cum a fost trimis în emigrare Ianucovici? Fusese semnat un acord între autoritățile ucrainene și opoziția ucraineană cu participarea Germaniei, Franței și Poloniei. Dar la ziua următoare, acordul a fost rupt, călcat în picioare.
Da,
și opoziționerii au început să efectueze acțiuni militare directe, violente.
В контексте той ситуации мы предлагали провести трехсторонние консультации между Украиной, Евросоюзом и Россией, поскольку Украина была членом СНГ, Содружества независимых государств, и, соответственно, участником зоны свободной торговли СНГ. А соглашение с Евросоюзом предполагало тоже создание зоны свободной торговли, которой между Россией и Евросоюзом не было. Нам не очень вежливо отказали.
Noi propuneam organizarea consultărilor trilaterale, adică UE, Ucraina și Rusia. Și Ucraina era membra a comunității statelor independente și făcea parte din zona de comerț liber a comunității statelor independente. Iar UE propunea ca Ucraina să devină parte a zonei de liber comerț a UE. Și Rusia și UE nu aveau una zonă de comerț liber comună.
Нам тогда не очень вежливо отказали.
În acest context,
Из Брюсселя.
ni s-a refuzat în mod nu foarte politicos din partea Bruxellesului.
Сейчас, когда Брюссель объявил нам фактически тотальную экономическую войну, прекращая постепенно любое сотрудничество, закрывая сферу за сферой такого сотрудничества, за исключением нефтегазовой пока, да, то тут возникает уже вопрос, а как нам относиться к Евросоюзу? И в таких случаях, опираясь на свой опыт, я бы сказал, что ответ на этот вопрос должен быть такой примерно. Поживем, увидим. Что касается членов ЕАЭС, Евразийского экономического союза, то никто, в принципе, никогда не запрещал им участвовать в каких-то других международных объединениях. Вот. Некоторые, например, из них входят в ассоциацию тюркских государств, предположим, да, куда-то еще, вот, а некоторые не входят туда. Поэтому, так сказать, они суверенные государства, и они должны сами оценивать, какие и где лежат их подлинные экономические интересы. Но до сих пор, до последнего времени, мы констатируем, что Евразес, Евроазийский экономический союз становится все более эффективным механизмом, обеспечивая целый ряд преимуществ государствам-членам, как это проявилось во время пандемии, когда все члены этого союза не зависели от поставок иностранных вакцин, например. Da, ia zamă.
Deci, în situația în care Bruxelles ne-a declarat un război total economic, închizând domeniul după domeniul de cooperare, cu excepția petrolului și gazelor, se naște întrebarea, care este atitudinea noastră față de UE? Judecându după experiența mea personală, eu aș spune să trăim și să vedem. În ceea ce privește Uniunea Economică Euroasiatică, noi nu interziceam nicăieri statelor membre ale Uniunii Economice Euroasiatice să participe în alte grupări, în alte organizații, de exemplu Asociația Statelor Turcice și așa mai departe. Aceste state care fac parte din Uniunea Economică Euroasiatică trebuie să evalueze ele înseși unde sunt interesele lor economice. Dar putem să spunem că Uniunea Economică Euroasiatică a dovedit că este foarte eficientă, a acordat o serie de avantaje pentru statele membre ale sale. De exemplu, am văzut ce s-a întâmplat în contextul pandemiei COVID-19.
И в целом вот процесс интеграции внутри Евразес проходит очень выверенно, очень постепенно, с максимальным учетом интересов всех входящих в него государств, будь это рынок, допустим, электроэнергии или газовый рынок, или еще какие-то формы объединения.
Și putem să spunem că procesul de integrare în cadrul Uniunii Economice Euroasiatice se desfășoară în mod corect, treptat, ținând cont de interesele statelor membre în domeniul energiei electrice, în domeniul gazelor și așa mai departe.
Вот главный индикатор, который может быть упомянут в этом контексте, заключается в том, что вот в контексте пандемии, в ходе пандемии и сразу после него, после, скажем так сказать, снижения этой опасности, которая сейчас вот наблюдается, с точки зрения взаимной торговли, государства Евразес росли, как говорят, да, экономисты, быстрее, чем и восстанавливались быстрее, чем большинство остальных государств мира, скажем, Европейского Союза. Вот. Особенно в сфере взаимной торговли.
Și indicatorul principal este că în cadrul pandemiei și după reducerea pericolului pandemiei, statele membre ale Uniunii Economice Euroasiatice au crescut și s-au reconstruit mai repede decât statele din UE, de exemplu.
Так что поживем и видим.
Deci să trăim, să vedem.
Да, пожалуйста. Давай, какой вопрос?
A draft presidential decree is being prepared for the introduction of visa retaliation measures in connection with hostile actions of several foreign governments, announced Sergei Lavrov.
Yeah.
The project provides for a whole host of restrictions on entry into Russia, Lavrov said. What does this mean for Romanians working for different companies in Russia, or even living there temporarily?
Сейчас, пока такой документ не принят официально, рассуждать о его окончательном тексте сложно. Вместе с тем, надо иметь в виду, что все предлагаемые нами меры носят характер на английском, но хорошо. I can speak English, of course. As far as this draft decree hasn't yet been published, it is too prematurely to speculate what will be the details and what will be the consequences of future decisions. But in principle, all our steps in this situation are reciprocal steps. Reciprocal steps. And we're not looking for disruption of regular, mutually beneficial economic relations, for example, or exchange of tourists. In no way. But if, and as soon as we face certain discriminatory measures, of course, we'll have to reply. And I have tried to bring you wider understanding how we see all those anti-Russian unprecedented sanctions, completely illegal from the standpoint of Europe, of the international law. We see them as a specific features of the current situation in the world markets. World markets, they are not under full control of one even powerful state like the United States of America or European Union or others. As far as balance of economic forces in the world has already evolved enormously since the time America dominated global economy after the Second World War, for example, or even till the 80s, last century, last millennium. So we'll live, we'll see. For sure, we are interested in preserving most possible areas of mutually beneficial cooperation between our countries. What will be the steps that will be undertaken by the West, by European Union in this particular case? And why I'm speaking about European Union? Because I was told more than once in your foreign ministry that every decision of European Union, it is not imposed on Romania. It is Romania, which is a co-author, a co-sponsor, one of the parents of every decision. And I haven't heard anything, if you like, distinguishing Romania from this mainstream in European Union. And mainstream in European Union, we see very well, it is in fact dictated from beyond the ocean by well-known leaders of the United States of amnesia, where a president could change his own statements within half an hour or 15 minutes from yes to no, whose every word is interpreted, this one from State Department, another one from the office of the White House, administration of White House, and so on and so forth. Well, in such situation, any profit in the sense of a person who tries to see the future, to make a forecast or prognosis, can easily make a mistake and miscalculation. Prophecy now is not an easy job to do. So I'm not claiming to be such a clairvoyant prophet in this field. This is my answer for the moment. Please.
Слышно?
Да.
Здравствуйте, Валерий Иванович.
Добрый день.
Не секрет, что у стран НАТО и ЕС нет единой позиции в связи с военной операцией России на Украине и с отношениями с Россией в целом, хотя после каждого саммита они говорят о единстве. Между позициями стран есть определенные различия. Как принято говорить иногда, есть голуби, есть ястребы. Не могли бы вы объяснить, в чем состоит специфика позиции Румынии? Добавить, так сказать, немного нюансов к черно-белой картине, которую рисуют некоторые СМИ. Спасибо.
Ну что ж, это вопрос, как говорится, по теме. Мы стараемся изучать эту тему. Но, как я уже только что сказал в ответе на другой вопрос, мы видим, что Румыния постоянно солидаризируется с мейнстримом Евросоюза, а мейнстрим Евросоюза, я уже не говорю про мейнстрим НАТО, так, он настроен очень воинственно против России сейчас. И согласен, что есть определенные нюансы в позициях разных стран, но в итоге, в конечном итоге, я что, по-русски стал говорить? Ну, я же говорю для ruscoязычной аудитории. Ну, давай.
Noi încercăm să studiem această temă, dar, după cum am spus deja, noi vedem că România se solidarizează cu mainstream-ul din UE și acest mainstream constă într-o atitudine foarte belicoasă față de Rusia.
Что можно отметить, вот, что я могу отметить как посол, находящийся в Бухаресте и видящий более детально всю эту картину? Я мельком уже говорил, могу повторить о том, что мы высоко оцениваем позицию, занятую Румынией в вопросе оказания гуманитарной помощи беженцам с Украины. Это, несомненно, позитивно выделяет Румынию в этом плане, хотя сейчас, опять же, нельзя назвать эту позицию уникальной среди позиций других евросоюзовских членов.
Deci eu pot să repet, fiind ambasadorul Rusiei, noi apreciem poziția României în ceea ce privește acordarea ajutorului către refugiații din Ucraina. Aceasta este laudabil, dar în același timp nu este ceva unic în cadrul UE.
Вот когда в конце прошлого года, помните, была ситуация на белорусско-польской границе, да? Там тоже были беженцы, только с Ближнего Востока. Как встречала Европа их? Тоже единогласно, единомысленно.
Și trebuie să ne amintim că în sfârșitul anului trecut a avut loc o situație cu refugiații la granița între Belarus și UE. Și noi ținem minte cum UE trata această situație în mod unanim.
Да. Ну, насколько я могу судить, тем не менее, вот то, что привлекает в позицию Румынии, это то, что солидарность, гуманитарное сочувствие, солидарность с украинскими беженцами не ограничивается уровнем официальной власти. Она, как говорится, владеет и диктует действия и общественных организаций, и частных лиц, и религиозных различных учреждений. Это, конечно, выгодно отличает Румынию в этом плане.
Dar noi vedem că solidaritatea, compasiunea umanitară față de refugiați din Ucraina în România nu este exprimată doar la nivelul autorităților oficiale, dar și la nivelul organizațiilor sociale, persoanelor separate sau organizațiilor religioase.
В то же время, когда мы смотрим, скажем, на ситуацию российского бизнеса здесь, мы видим, что, опять же, за исключением нефтегазового сектора, российский бизнес здесь пытаются выбросить из, так сказать, пространства, румынского экономического пространства. Например, вот крупная металлургическая компания, которая имела здесь свое производство, инвестировала сюда средства довольно значительные, ей просто перекрыли кислород, как говорят, не вдаваясь в финансовые подробности.
Dar în același timp, când vedem ce se întâmplă cu afacerile ruse pe teritoriul României, cu excepția petrolului și gazelor, desigur, noi vedem că există încercări de a alunga din spațiul românesc, companii rusești. De exemplu, putem să privim o companie metalurgică care produce țevi. Și, de fapt, a fost suspendată furnizarea cu oxigen pentru această companie, cum se spune în Rusia.
И это при том, что владелец этой компании, господин Пумпянский, он значительную часть производства вообще разместил еще в Соединенных Штатах Америки, во многих странах мира. И заявил в самом начале вот последнего, так сказать, обострения международных отношений, что он выходит из состава бенефициаров, то есть он никакой прибыли от этой компании больше не получает. Это не помогло.
Dar trebuie amintit că domnul Pumpianski, care a desfășurat producerea în SUA, în mai multe țări, a declarat că a părăsit grupul de beneficiari. Deci el nu obține niciun profit, dar acest fapt nu a ajutat mult.
То же самое случилось с Аэрофлотом, с некоторыми другими, но позитивно отличает румынскую позицию. С моей точки зрения, я не знаю, насколько это адекватное сравнение, мне в деталях неизвестна ситуация в других странах, отличает, например, готовность Министерства иностранных дел рассматривать наши жалобы на дискриминацию русскоязычных бизнесов, русскоязычных или даже российских граждан, живущих в стране, хотя concretных действий пока мы особенно не замечаем.
Acest lucru s-a întâmplat și cu Aeroflot și cu alte companii, dar eu pot să spun că există unele semne pozitive în abordarea României. Nu știu cum se face în alte țări, dar în România o vedem. Noi vedem disponibilitatea Ministerului Afacerilor Externe din România să analizeze plângerile privind discriminarea companiilor și cetățenilor ruși pe teritoriul României. Noi vedem această disponibilitate, dar deocamdată nu vedem acțiuni concrete.
В этом плане Румыния, как я уже сказал, она следует четко в мейнстриме или в кильваторе вслед за брюссельским вот этим вот лидером.
Deci, în acest context, România se află în mainstream-ul care este creat de Bruxelles.
С точки зрения, скажем, поставок газа, здесь этот вопрос не очень актуален, насколько я знаю, хотя определенные контракты возможны и бывают на поставке российского газа в Румынию. В последний год такие поставки резко уменьшились, насколько мне известно.
În ceea ce privește furnizarea gazelor, din câte știu eu, această problemă nu este foarte relevantă, dar contracte există și erau încheiate, dar din câte știu eu, furnizarea cu gaze s-a redus în ultimul timp.
Нефтяники пока работают, как говорится, достаточно в спокойной обстановке, наверное, это неправильно будет сказать, работают довольно, так сказать, ритмично, вот, на особые проблемы не жалуются.
Petroliștii lucrează nu în liniște, dar în mod ritmic și nu depun plângeri.
В то же время найти какое-то отличие, я не говорю в сторону плюса или в сторону минуса даже, в позиции Румынии по, значит, таким вопросам, как вот украинский кризис, скажем, в целом, да, отношения Россия-НАТО, НАТО-Россия в данном случае, практически от вот этой коллективной позиции НАТО, Евросоюза невозможно. Более того, румынское правительство активно стремится и увеличивать свои военные расходы. Это его личное дело, так сказать, это его собственное дело. Но в то же время размещать здесь все больше вооруженных сил третьих государств, которые не будут, пребывая здесь, в Румынии, никак не будут способствовать стабильности и безопасности в регионе, а только будут усиливать напряженность.
În același timp, dacă vorbim despre diferențe pozitive sau negative în poziția României în ceea ce privește criza din Ucraina, relațiile NATO-Rusie, nu există diferențe foarte mari. Practic, nu există dacă vorbim despre poziția colectivă a UE și NATO. Noi vedem că guvernul român mărește cheltuieli militare și permite deplasarea forțelor armate din țările terțe. Acest lucru nu va contribui la stabilitate, iar va crește tensiunile.
В этом смысле мы связываем перспективы нормализации, оздоровления отношений с перспективами общего процесса ослабления напряженности, выхода на какие-то реальные политические, дипломатические решения.
Deci, noi, din punctul nostru de vedere, normalizarea și însăntușirea relațiilor va depinde de reducerea tensiunilor în general și va depinde de ajungerea la unele soluții politice și diplomatice.
Пожалуй, единственная сфера, где действительно можно констатировать со знаком плюс отличие румынской позиции в нынешней ситуации по отношению к России, это отношения консульские, протокольные между нашими министерствами, министерствами иностранных дел и посольствами румынским в Москве и здесь, нашим, соответственно, с внешнеполитическим ведомством страны пребывания.
Unicul domeniu în care vedem diferențe pozitive în România, în poziția României, este relații consulare și de protocol. Relațiile între ministerele noastre de externe, relațiile între ambasada noastră și MAE român, între ambasada română la Moscova și MAE rus.
Но тут я могу опираться только на сообщения средств массовой информации, скажем, о ситуации где-нибудь в Варшаве, в некоторых других точках.
Aici pot să judec doar având informație din mass media, de exemplu, informație despre ce se întâmplă în Varșovia sau în alte țări.
Со своей стороны, мы ценим это, мы считаем, что дипломатические отношения должны поддерживаться в соответствии с известными документами, основополагающими Венскими конвенциями о дипломатических и консульских отношениях, должны быть корректными.
Din partea noastră, noi apreciem acest lucru și credem că relațiile diplomatice trebuie să corespundă documentelor cunoscute, în special convențiilor de la Viena privind relațiile diplomatice și consulare.
Ну вот, вроде бы я сделал достаточно полный обзор тех сфер, в которых мы сейчас можем говорить об отношениях. Я рассчитываю, что эти отношения имеют резервы для развития, прежде всего потому, что мы остаемся близкими соседями, у нас много не всегда объемных, но достаточно взаимодополняющих экономических интересов и возможностей, которые всегда делали торговлю достаточно объемной. В разном смысле торговли, все экономические отношения.
Deci, cred că am trecut în revistă domeniile de cooperare. Cred că există rezerve, având în vedere că suntem vecini și există interese economice, comerciale care se complementează.
Ну, так, если можно сказать коротко, то примерно такой ответ можно дать, Николай Николаевич, на ваш вопрос.
Scurt, aceasta ar trebui să fie răspunsul la întrebarea dumneavoastră.
Надеюсь, что смог вас удовлетворить.
Sper că
Пожалуйста, следующий
vă
вопрос.
bucurați.
Good day, Your Excellency, and I would like to personally thank you for having me here today at this briefing. I do have several questions, and the first one will be the following. Why choose this military operation? From my experience with the Russian people, I know for a fact that they are quite pacifist persons. They are not only not favorable against any kind of military combat, intervention, tactical, and so on, but judging by history itself of the Russian people, they have suffered immense and tragic losses along their history. My question here is as following. Could have not been possible a more diplomatical way? Was this military operation the last resort of the Russian government? Because I'm pretty sure this military operation could have been avoided if both sides would have been more open.
Well, I can agree with you that if both sides have shown goodwill, this situation could have been avoided for sure. I appreciate your evaluation, your opinion on the peaceful motivations and peaceful traditions of Russian people. You're right, but I have mentioned today in my briefing that Russian Federation, its leadership, and leadership is enjoying overall support of about 80% of the population of our country. In this regard, special military operation in Ukraine enjoys full support of over 80% of Russian population. And those polls have been carried by different structures, not only Russian, but Western as well. That military operation became indeed the last resort. And I tried in my briefing to show to you why. Because, first of all, population of Donbas region who didn't agree with the neo-Nazi, anti-Russian values and goals of Kiev regime, which installed itself in Ukraine after that Maidan revolution of dignity. They suffered from genocidal practices, from shelling, from terrorist attacks, which I have already mentioned. I'm not going to elaborate too much about it, but we have tried not only within the framework of Ukrainian situation, but in a larger context. I mentioned briefly different episodes of this 30 years ago and 2 months more. Soviet Union disappeared from the political map of the world. And our president, Boris Yeltsin, went to American Congress and congratulated American Congress in full, Senate and House of Representatives, with the overthrow of the idol of communism. And everything was beautiful. With the only exception, NATO started to expand towards our borders. At first, we protested confidentially through diplomatic channels. Then came President Putin, younger generation politician at that time, evidently, who was the first to offer American President Bush a helping hand to fight international terrorism after 9/11, and so on and so forth. In between, there came such events as bombing of Yugoslavia, 2002, scrapping ABM Treaty, which limited development of anti-ballistic missile defenses, both in Russia and the United States. 2002, Deveselo was negotiated later, but well before Ukrainian crisis, by the way. So, in spite of, it was not only that, Russian Federation already under President Putin scrapped the last Russian military bases overseas in Vietnam, a heritage of that notorious Vietnam War, when Americans killed, murdered, and poisoned 2 million civilian peaceful citizens of Vietnam. 2 million through carpet bombings, through dispersion of that Agent Orange poisonous substance to destroy jungles where guerrilla movement of Vietnamese people hide themselves, members of guerrilla movement hide themselves, and Vietnamese military installations as well were hidden. And later on, one after another, another facility was on Cuba. It was radio electronic intelligence station, which covered the whole territory of the United States. They were closed in the early years of this century, early years 2000. Nothing was received adequately. In 2007, Putin went to Munich, to that, at that time, very popular conference for international security in February 2007, completing his second term in the office of the president. And he proclaimed, he pronounced his famous Munich speech, telling that unipolar world, and in particular the practice of that unipolar international politics, they are not matching the real balance of forces in the world. And evidently, Russia can't reconcile with those practices when Russia was denied to possess, to have any legitimate interest beyond its own borders. American legitimate interests, we were told, are everywhere, including inside Russia. Russia shouldn't have any legitimate foreign interests outside its borders. Finish. So then there was a test of that small Georgian intervention in the southern Ossetia, which was later called, in a post-truth world of fakes and lies, Russian aggression against Georgia. Yes. Later, at that time, there was a person whose name was Sarkozy, French president, who showed certain political courage to mediate in that situation between West and Russia. And that mediation brought up a documented proof of Russian innocence, if such a word could be completely correctly used for a military conflict. Responsibility for that conflict in the report of Tagliavini, a European diplomat authorized to investigate, responsibility was attributed directly to the president of Georgia and Georgian government. And as for Russia, it was said that if Russia could be blamed of anything, maybe of some excessive use of force at certain phases of that conflict. That phase, I can tell you, for the reason of relatively poor communications at that time, Russian forces lost got lost in Georgia. And Georgia is not a big state like Ukraine. They reached suburbs of Tbilisi. And when they asked Babushka Bunika at the side of the road, where are we? Tell us. And they were told that you are just one step from entering Tbilisi. They turned back, and so on and so on. So, but later it was all the same. Last year, for example, in Davos Economic Forum, President Putin, I'm not speaking about 2018, when there was another very important speech of Russian president who was running for another term of office. Early last year, in Davos Forum, President Putin said that modern capitalist model of economy and social organization has exhausted its resources. It can't settle problems. It can't face challenges of the modern world. It is roughly, but believe me, the point is quoted by me rather properly, rather correctly. No response, new sanctions, no pressure, blackmail. Then last December, we offered them passing by Minsk Accords. It was another major initiative which could have been developed into just and democratic, peaceful solution of Ukrainian situation. After all, in Switzerland, which is considered a democratic state, I hope, there are 4 official languages. Every canton has such an autonomy that they enjoy themselves in full. I remember that for years they were voting against joining United Nations organization, and nothing happened. They were prosperous, they were flourishing and enjoying themselves. Here in Ukraine, there was evidently a region that couldn't be tolerated by Ukrainian Nazis as an acceptable phenomena inside Ukraine. And that in the same way, residents of that region, and there were millions of them, they were not ready to tolerate neo-Nazism revival in the rest of the, but if they found, if such a solution could have been brought with joint pressure from both the West and both the East, then a peaceful solution could have been imagined, could have been expected to become a reality. But what happened? The West pumped money, weapons into Kiev regime. Nazi battalions were incorporated in the National Guard, becoming an integral part of the armed forces, and nationalist activists like Bolshevik commissars in their time are now introduced in every unit of the Ukrainian army. There have been already clashes in between them. In Mariupol, for example, it came so far as Точка U, that dangerous and not very accurate missile was used by the army against the neo-Nazis. Probably they missed the headquarters. Nowadays, a couple of days ago, in spite of the alleged heroism of those neo-Nazis, the commander of Azov battalion was planning escape by helicopter. Helicopter was shot down by the air defense, showing, giving us another proof of domination of Russian air defense and air force in the skies of Ukraine. So you see, how could we, in this regard, deal with the European and NATO policies towards Russia? We started from congratulating America with the disappearance of the Soviet Union. And now we see that communist ideology was nothing. It was just false pretext. Everything was nothing. The only regime for Russia that was acceptable to the Americans, it was a regime of pumping out of resources, of money, of brains, and so on and so forth, and preferably dismantling of Russian Federation as a too big and too rich state. This is, unfortunately, geopolitical reality that we're now facing directly, unequivocally. It is not our scares, night cauchemars. No, it is a reality. So in this regard, and I have tried to the best of my knowledge and to the best of my rhetorics available and art of rhetorics, to present this case exactly as a forced, unwillingly, but nevertheless very necessary preemptive act, because we are fed up with the situations of 22nd of June 1941. Very many invaders, like Napoleon, like Hitler, like others, they enjoyed that peaceful character and peaceful, if you like, ambitions of the Russian nation, of Russian state. What was the result? The result was enormous victims that we had to sacrifice to get liberated from those invaders. So that is why we are not in a hurry with our special military operation. We are moving ahead according to a plan. Casualties are minimized. In fact, we're acting there only with the professional part of our army, only with those people who are well trained, are experienced in different other conflicts, and they have chosen this military profession as their mission, or if you like, occupation of their life. And numerically, they're much fewer than those neo-Nazists and Ukrainian military still shooting and shelling Donbass, killing innocent civilians every day. You are not interested in what are they feeling, what are their emotions, or at least don't remember it in this context. This is the situation. We had no dream of launching such an operation, but it became a necessity, if you like, the smaller evil compared to very probable consequences of continuation of those fruitless efforts to bring the West to the real negotiations, meaningful talks around the table around the diplomatic table. This is my answer. Please, one more question, and I believe it is enough.
Thank you, Your Excellency. My question is the next one. Will Romanians, those Romanians who share Russian values and culture, and who do not want to be associated with the propaganda, with this propaganda against Russia and the Russian people, will still be able to travel to Russia, but to receive temporary residence in the Russia Federation in the next week and month? Thank you.
I can't got the point of your question. If you speak about refugees, Ukrainian refugees are free to come to Russian territory if it is about Russian position. But I tried to explain that neo-Nazis, they treat their own population, the population of Ukraine proper, as a population of a hostile enemy country. They don't care about their lives, about their welfare, about their living quarters. They only are, if you like, concerned with their own security. They are using civil population as human shield. They do not allow, at first it was foreign students, now it is rank and file Ukrainians who would like to go to Russian territory to escape the zone of hostilities. They are shot directly with firearms. In some cases, we managed to allow them to go. And I have told you that the first wave was a voluntary evacuation before the beginning of the operation, because shelling of major cities of Lugansk and Donetsk republics increased to the levels of 2014, 2015, when there were an outright war. There was a war there. And shelling increased. Now we have too many facts and evidence to say firmly and for sure that a big assault against the republics was planned. And it was preempted, it was thwarted by Russian operation. Otherwise, at that time, the first wave was about 150,000. Now it is over 500,000, the overall number of refugees, Ukrainian refugees on our territory. They are free to come. Though those extremists, those neo-Nazis already, in a few situations, shelled not very many, but single shells and rockets into the territory of the Russian Federation across the border. This is the rude, I would say, tough reality of Ukraine now. Neo-Nazis, they don't care about the people of Ukraine. They don't care. How can we operate in this situation, act in this situation? We are trying to eliminate the pockets of the resistance one after another, without massive shelling of major cities, without using our domination in the air, without using high precise weapons, but against military facilities, training camps, fuel and ammunition depots. This is everything that could be done, and we do it. Thank you, if I properly understood your question. Thank you very much. So, Gabriela Del Pupo, please.
Hello.
Hello.
I would like to ask you a question from a personal matter. Now,
Yes,
you've managed so far to argument very well on behalf of the leader in Kremlin. But I know you've had some experience in Chisinau and in Bucharest that would have brought you closer to the Romanian people. Now, what do you think are your personal priorities? And if any, in any case, those priorities of you defending the Russians that are, as you put it, in your speech today, are discriminated in Romania and in the Republic of Moldavia, are in any way in contrary with the diplomacy that you have to have being someone appointed by Kremlin in these countries?
Well, about my own priorities, professional priorities, they are not unique, they are not original. My professional priorities here, it is my, if you like, professional duty, is to keep our relations as good, as normal. Now, normal is a better fitting term as possible. That is why we are working on all those controversial issues, whether it is discriminating our businesses or our citizens, according to the rules established by civilized diplomatic relations between the countries. This is evidently my priority. My personal priority, you see, I can't now distinguish between my personal priorities and my professional priorities here, because evidently in our tense situation, tense in the terms of different steps, exchange of blows, if you like, yes, between NATO and Russia, European Union and Russia. Of course, we're absorbed with these activities, and there is no much spare time to think about anything else. But I still bear hope, and I know from my personal context and experience that many Romanians now were disoriented by that typhoon, tsunami of fake war propaganda coming from certain countries of the West and from Ukraine in particular. But their attitudes towards Russia are quite normal, quite natural. We have many things and episodes in history that prove that we have to preserve and cherish those positive, that positive heritage of our past. And in this regard, we still cherish hope that this crisis will be over, and if you like, more sober, more reasonable attitudes in international politics will prevail, so that to allow diplomacy to play its more active role. You see that even in such a tense situation, a NATO country, Turkey, managed to contribute. We don't know for the moment how important would be, how really substantial and decisive would be that contribution, but it managed to contribute to maintain and to, if you like, to stimulate the process of political talks between Russia and Ukraine. Some other actions and efforts could be imagined, could be expected in this regard. We are open as well for such ideas and opportunities. Nevertheless, the final conclusion is, we'll live, we'll see. We are really and consistently interested in regular, normal relations with whole Europe, European Union, NATO countries, Romania, everywhere. And we have proved that the sincerity, if you like, of that will through the decades. You remember when started this notorious gas supply issue? It started in the midst of the Cold War, when it was ideological confrontation, allegedly antagonistic, irreconcilable. But at that time, there were courageous leaders in the Federal Republic of Germany, Western Germany at that time. And they started that process, and Soviet leadership was willingly reciprocating. Those big pipelines were constructed, were built, and supplies went through those pipelines for decades. We're ready to continue in this way, but we're facing completely, completely different attitudes in the West, you see. We have put out of this whole, my favorite geographic map, where, no, где она есть? Вот technical team promised to show you this map, where it is very, very spectacularly, it is too big. And those borders are not very visible, distinguishable. These are, so on this card, on this map, I'm sorry, you can see the borders between NATO countries and Soviet Union or Warsaw Pact. They went from the north of Norway around Sweden to the Western Germany, to Berlin. Still, there are about 150 American military facilities in Germany. Other dark black points as well, reflecting American bases and military facilities around Russia now. But now Russian borders are hundreds, not to say thousands and more kilometers to the east from the former borders of Warsaw Pact Treaty members and NATO. And we're still to blame for something, for dangerous approaching the borders of NATO countries. Dear friends, on this basis, and our president has reiterated it more than once, at least since 2007, 15 years ago, gradually, with eloquent argumentation, with positive, creative initiatives for building better relations. And we are facing now what? We are facing now that is going on in Ukraine, for example. We are facing economic war, all-out economic war against Russia with 5,500 sanctions, which I have mentioned already today, and so on and so forth. So solution could be only reciprocal, mutually respectful, balanced. We are ready. And this is both my professional and my personal ambition, because I am already a person approaching the finish of the 7th decade of my life. I have seen very much. I remember vaguely even Caribbean nuclear crisis of the beginning of the 60s. And the flight of Yuri Gagarin, first space flight, I remember very well, because it was an outsplash of emotions in Russia, in the Soviet Union, in Moscow, where I lived, and so on and so forth. So, my dear friends, you are welcome. Any positive initiatives, any creative ideas to improve our relations are welcome. We're ready to pick up. This is, I believe, quite exhausting response to your question. Thank you very much. Thank you, dear ladies and gentlemen. I wish you all the best, and I wish all of us a happy outcome of this big crisis in the international relations. Goodbye.